a culture he apparently knew nothing about. He certainly valued folk music. He certainly valued the Czech music that he had grown up with, and he valued the people who had generated it. We know that much. But American Indian culture, that was something else. He didn't know anything about it, and besides that, there's no evidence to show that he really was interested in learning anything about it. Do we dare ask whether Dvorak may have been exploiting American Indian culture? He was, after all, earning a huge salary as the music director of the National Conservatory of Music. $15,000 a year. That was 2,500 times the amount that he had ever earned before. It was $5,000 more than the mayor of New York earned annually. Some of us musicians think that's not such a bad idea. But we might ask the question, is the New World Symphony yet another cultural encroachment by a white European male? In a strange way, I wish that I could say yes. See if you bear with me for a moment. And the answer goes much farther beyond Dvorak's individual situation. By the time Dvorak arrived on these shores, American Indians had been completely decimated and dispersed. 60 years had passed since the Indian Removal Act had forced over 90% of all Americans east of the Mississippi to move out west, and they lived on reservations with unfarmable lands. It had been 16 years since the American Indians had won a battle. 16 years since Chief Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse had defeated General Custer at the Little Bighorn. So the buffalo, the chief food source for the Plains Indians, they were now almost extinct. And almost all the Indian tribes, as I've mentioned, were living on reservations. The frontier life for the Indians, that was all distant memory. I mentioned Buffalo Bill Cody's Traveling Roadshow. In 1892 or 93, Dvorak actually saw this show, but were he to have visited it 7 years earlier, in 1885, he might have witnessed a grotesque spectacle. He might have seen the once proud and mighty Chief Sitting Bull riding around the ring prior to a reenactment of the battle at the Little Bighorn. Only this time, in Buffalo Bill Cody's Roadshow, they were going to get the battle just right. The sad fact is that even if Dvorak had wanted to learn about American Indian culture, it would probably have been extremely difficult for him to do so because the source for American Indian culture is just completely dried up almost as suddenly as the buffalo. Our words will always come up short in describing this Holocaust, and we suffer from the results of it yet today. So what were Dvorak's sources of information about the American Indians? Where did his inspiration come from? Well, it seems to have come from one source, and that was a non-musical source. The epic poem, The Song of Hiawatha by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Hiawatha was first published in 1855. It sold 5,000 copies in just 5 weeks. 15,000 copies of it had been sold in 6 months, and 45,000 copies by 1859. That guaranteed its status as a blockbuster. Within a decade, Hiawatha had been translated into 10 European languages. One of them was Czech, and Dvorak was familiar back in his Bohemian days. He was familiar with the translator of that edition, and he probably knew that when he was in his early 30s, he probably knew the text. But at any rate, when he first arrived on these shores, Mrs. Thurber gave him a copy of the Song of Hiawatha. Well, whether romanticized or not, it was the only source that most Americans had about the American Indians. Maybe some of you still remember those lines that some of us were forced to memorize in our school days. By the shores of Gitchigumi, by the shining Big Sea water, stood the wigwam of Nokomis. daughter of the moon, Nokomis. I could hear some whispering going on, so yes, it rings a bell for you. Well, as I've mentioned, Dvorak knew the translator of the Czech edition of this, and it seems very clear that Dvorak actually had planned to compose a very large-scale work on the Hiawatha theme. In fact, he had contemplated an opera. For some reasons, that never took place. We have no proof of a Hiawatha connection with the New World Symphony. But Dvorak scholar Michael Beckerman believes that parts of the New World Symphony are based upon the Hiawatha poem. And the scenes that Dvorak sets in his symphony then would relate to the death of Minnehaha, that in movement 2, there's a rather funereal section, and then the wedding feast of Hiawatha and of Minnehaha and Hiawatha in the 3rd movement, and then the chase and the slaying of Palpakiwis, the medicine man, by Hiawatha in the 4th movement. Now, Michael Beckerman does something absolutely astonishing and quite controversial, which is he's gone back to the poem and he's underlaid parts of the poem with sections of the symphony, okay, with startling results. Let's see what's going on here. The 3rd movement of the New World Symphony then takes place at the wedding feast of Hiawatha. And the medicine man, Palpakiwi, steps forward and he does homage at this feast. So first, he treads softly like a panther. Now, this is a man of great magic. In fact, he's even something of an illusionist. So the first thing that he does is he treads softly like a panther. Then the leaves start whirling around him, and he reaches down and clutches at sand. So here's what it sounds like when he first starts his dance. Maybe you could hear a stomping in the timpani there at the very end, and before that you could hear the whirling of the leaves represented by the 2nd violins. Now this Palpakiwi is a very charismatic character and also something of an illusionist. So while everybody's seated at the table, he actually makes the earthenware and the pots levitate off the table, and they look up at them and they've turned into silver. So it's quite an astonishing moment, and Dvorak uses the triangle to suggest that magic is afoot. Shortly after that, Palpakiwi transforms all the guests at the table into birds. And Dvorak actually loved birds. He visited Central Park, loved to see the birds there, and he even had a big collection of pigeons. So there's no doubt that Dvorak loved birds. Maybe you'll be able to see the connection with the music and Dvorak's appreciation of birds. Now, so Palpakiwi transforms all of the guests into birds, into blackbirds and thrushes and magpies and blue jays. Those trills, the birds chirping away. Now as I get my edition of part of the poem out, we're going to listen to an extended segment of the 3rd movement, the wedding feast of Hiawatha. To the sounds of flutes and singing, to the sounds of drums and voices, rose the handsome Palpakiwi and began his mystic dances. First, he danced a solemn measure, treading softly like a panther. Then more swiftly and still swifter, whirling, spinning round in circles, leaping o'er the guests assembled, eddying round and round the wigwam till the leaves went whirling with him, stamped upon the sand and tossed it wildly in the air around him till the wind became a whirlwind, till the sand was blown and sifted like great snowdrifts o'er the landscape. And they felt it rising, rising slowly through the air, ascending from the darkness of the treetops forth into the dewy starlight till it passed the topmost branches. And behold, the wooden dishes all were changed to shells of scarlet. And behold, the earthen kettles were all changed to bowls of silver. All the sisters and their husbands were changed to birds of various plumage. Some were jays and some were magpies, others were thrushes, others blackbirds. And they hopped and sang and twittered, perked and fluttered to all their feathers, strutted in their shining plumage, and their tails like fans unfolded.